tell us when we're supposed to start.
Well, good morning, Susan and Kimberly. Eve with IBM speaking.
Hello, Eve. Welcome, and hope all's well with you.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan. It's Suzanne from Australia.
Suzanne. Oh, what a nice surprise. Excellent. I always assume time zones make this impossible, so I'm glad you were able to join us.
Hi, Suzanne. Nice to hear your voice.
Lovely to hear yours, Eve.
Hi, Susan. It's Karen at American Express.
Hi, Karen. Gosh,
Hi.
It's been ages.
Long time no see.
Hi, Susan. It's Diane from BDF.
Diane. Well, it hasn't been ages. It was about 2 days ago since we talked.
It was about 2 days ago, but lots happens in 2 days at the moment.
Sure. Glad you could join.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we should just have a networking conversation, and I could get Suzanne talking to Eve, and you could both be talking to Sriva. However, instead, we're going to start this webinar, aren't we? All right. So, welcome everybody. I think many of you know that I've been working with Stefan for some time as we look at how can we make it easier for multinational organizations to define and deliver best practice in terms of enabling every colleague to get the tools and flexibility that they require, the workplace adjustment or workplace accommodation challenge. So I'm really pleased that Stefan and I have been able to cobble together this webinar instead of what I'd hoped for, which was the full day workshop to help us to methodically work through sharing experiences and pulling out the learning and taking a stab at trying to predict what needs to be done next. So thank you to everyone. Pardon? Thank you to everyone who's been involved in getting us to this point. I wanted to thank Simply Business for going to all the effort of getting the room and the catering all arranged and everything. And I know that we will be going back to you, Jennifer, to take a look at having a proper workshop in the fall when the world has reached a different place. So if we could just quickly summarize what we're doing today. I wanted to use it as an opportunity to take stock. What have we learned? Who's doing what? With a particular focus on what have we learned about what you could call the critical success factors or the fundamental ingredients, if you like, that if a company doesn't do these things, we will not deliver best practice. So you flip it and say, these are the stepping stones that make best practice possible. Obviously, we have to look at what gets in the way, the complexity that multinationals are managing as they set out down this trail. And we are with Stefan looking at the potential for a global business and disability network linked learning exchange, given that the global network has made the provision of workplace adjustments to a consistent standard, a work stream. I don't know, Stefan, did you want to come in with more detail on that? Or perhaps towards the end, we can take a look in more detail at what such a work stream might involve.
Later is okay, Susan, thank you.
Okay. So as we've said, please feel free to interrupt. And the trick is the unmute button, I guess, because waving at me probably isn't going to work. So very quickly, to remind us what we're talking about in terms of workplace adjustments, I'm sure everyone knows we mean the hard adjustments, whether it's the technology, the furniture, the keyboards, or soft adjustments. These are a little trickier. Policies and procedures regarding how people are allowed to work. Flexi time. Remember when you used to have to persuade the company to let you work from home because you had a disability. Perhaps those days are gone. Well, we'll see how that goes. Staff training, disability leave instead of sickness absence, and so on. And I think one element that we don't pay quite enough attention to is human aids, allowing people to have job coaches, the readers when a mandatory e-learning program is inaccessible, sign language interpreters, and so on. So I won't dwell on that. Next. The why. We need to do better at presenting the business and ethical rationale for getting consistent best practice. So I've tried to kind of pull out the highlights. We're enhancing productivity, employee engagement, and well-being. Some of that's linked to reducing absenteeism. So we know from the microlink data that if you cut waiting times from months to days, you reduce absenteeism, and you enhance employee engagement. Liberating managers' time and energy so they can manage. This is hugely important and so difficult to quantify. But if you look at employee engagement surveys where they disaggregate disability-related data, time and time again, disabled colleagues are much more likely to say that they have experienced bullying and harassment. I'm convinced that's because they waited 6 months for the manager to give them the adjustment that they require, and it feels like bullying. They keep asking them, and the manager can't make the system work. You're reducing turnover and loss of talent. We know, all of us, how many people have left jobs because they've waited so long or felt that the process was so badly managed. Another hidden cost, reducing the cost triggered by grievances and legal disputes. I can remember when we were looking at Lloyd's Banking Group, anecdotal evidence said that when the speed of response and the dignified and equitable access to this service was really improving, the formal grievances of all sorts dropped by 50%. How do we quantify the benefits to a business of reducing the time that managers spend in those processes? Reinforcing a culture shift from the standardization, vanilla stuff, everybody gets the same, towards individual empowerment, individualized workstations, and so on. That's a trend that surely now we're going to see really motoring. Reducing reputation, regulatory, operational risks when it goes wrong. It's interesting that the risk arguments don't seem to have as much impact at the top as I would have expected, but certainly the reputation and operational risks that are involved here, once we gather the evidence, become very clear. Enabling a mobile workforce. You hire the guy who needs a wheelchair in Hong Kong and he's terrific and he can't get into your offices in Indonesia. So it's, you know, there's a constellation here, if you like, of drivers that are starting to be recognized, acted on, and we're starting to collect the data. But it's still an argument that really needs to be made, I fear, in some companies. Next. So I think it's helpful to think of adjustments more as what I'm calling request packages. And if you look at the individual puts up a package that says, I can't access my pay slip because it's in a PDF and nobody's allowed to read it to me. So that, if you think of it as a package for help that goes up, you put on a barcode, and the challenge is to get that fixed or delivered within a reasonable period of time, 14 days perhaps. The example of the lights give me migraines I use to illustrate the complexity, the challenge, because of course you come up against, so who says migraines actually are triggered by lights? Who says that migraines are actually a disability according to local legislation? Do we have to do anything? Who says they should deliver the lights? Who finds the lights? Who pays for the lights? Who pays for delivery of the lights? When you think that very often procurement have not built into the contract with a facilities management outfit the requirement to meet accessibility and adjustment related standards of speed of response. So the facilities people can wait for months. And I certainly know of organizations where it takes 18 months to change a light bulb that triggers migraines. Next. So that's what, when you start to look at how long it takes and what happens when those request packages come up and are being managed through, it's when you look in detail at that you see the implications of ad hoc, when there isn't actually a service design or a service being managed end to end. So as you look at when the employee starts to say, I need something done differently, I'm in pain, and it's causing me a distraction on the job, never mind anything else. And of course, pain is the most frequently encountered disability. So where do you go? And that Canadian survey actually found there was something like 7 or 8 routes in to even starting to request for help. Who do you go to? Your manager, or do you go to an IT help desk if IT might be involved, or do you go to occupational health, or do you go to a disability specialist? In some organizations, you might even end up pretty soon requesting for help at employee relations because of a fear that there might be a dispute emerging. Do you qualify? This is a big obstacle in some ad hoc processes because, of course, who decides that migraines are a disability? And you do have to actually make an adjustment. What criteria are they using? Who gets involved? Is it doctors? Sending someone who asks for a Braille keyboard to occupational health, who decide, yes, she is blind. That's a classic story from one of the banks. That bank actually now enables her to get that keyboard over 24 hours because that triggered the need for the pre-approved catalog. But the specific request, who decides what you actually need? Do they agree with you that you do know what you need? Who approves it? How long does it take to get approval? Who says yes? Who's tracking what happens when you say no, why you said no, what the impact is? And who actually delivers it to a particular speed of response? And so not only delivers the actual adjustment package, but then make sure that you've been trained to use the JAWS that you got, or that actually it was the right package after all. So we put this up because when I talk about the end-to-end process, that's kind of what's in my head. From the moment the person says, this is my request for help package, to figuring out if they should get it and what it should really look like and getting approval for it and figuring out who pays for it and delivering it. And in many organizations, of course, this is done in a way that I could just call ad hoc. Next. And so if that's the kind of ad hoc, then what does the ideal start to look like? This is where I wish we had a workshop, because I'd like to spend a good hour talking to all of you about this. But we'll get there in the end, I guess. So what the ideal would look like, that we've got a service has been designed that provides employees with equitable and efficient access no matter where they live or work. And it's designed as a service and conceptualized as a service. It's a well-publicized, distinct logistical service line, by which I mean that end-to-end process is understood to be a service and it's managed accordingly in a proactive way. It's informed by disability expertise, not medical so much. And there are explicit performance standards that apply worldwide. And so one of the areas we'll be exploring in the workshop next September, October, is how the global head office sets standards in such a way that they're realistic and sensible at national level, and what that means. It delivers these request packages within 14 to 20 days. I can't imagine any other way to counter the delays that people encounter when they're trying to get their adjustments than having a standard that says, well, it's just got to happen within a reasonable period of time, and we think that's 20 days. And that both the individual and their managers are seen as valued customers of the service and are routinely asked, how's it working? Is it okay? How can we improve it? So that's the ideal. Next. And of course, we're not starting from scratch. We've been looking at this for ages. Since I wrote the Lloyd's Banking Group case study, where Microlink were involved in helping the bank to completely re-engineer, moving from ad hoc to systematic. I still think it's one of the best exemplary workplace adjustment services around. And it was from that we started to pull these critical success factors. The Microlink is continuing to gather data, insights into the impact on productivity and cost and so on of providing an effective and efficient service. We've got surveys starting to emerge, like this very interesting survey that the Canadian government recently did, where they asked thousands of their colleagues, filled a survey in what happens when we ask for particular kinds of adjustments. And of course, they're highlighting the impact of the ad hoc process, 8 routes in, and nobody knows how long it's going to take, and it takes longer, and no one's monitoring it, and there's no management information, and so on. So we are not starting right at the beginning. And I wanted to take a moment now to turn to 3 of our colleagues here who have some experience, some real experience at trying to make this work. So I wanted to start with Northrop Grumman, because we've got Naomi and Nikki on the line at 4 in the morning, I think. Naomi or Nikki, I don't know which of you is going to just give us an insight into perhaps the 1 or 2 things you're doing that you find are really effective, really making a difference. And perhaps the biggest challenge that you've got right on your radar screen now as you're looking at going global. Oh, well, at doing more global, because I know you are responsible for the global service.
Absolutely. So this is Naomi Tyre from Northrop Grumman. Great to talk to everybody, see a few faces on Zoom as well. So at Northrop Grumman, we are one of the companies, we really stood up our process from a US standpoint, which means that we're largely governed with the Americans with Disabilities Act. We are certainly looking at expanding our disability processes and our adjustments processes globally, but we really view forums like this as a true learning for us as we're expanding those processes as well. But for us, some of the things that we have found since we stood up our centralized request system 5 years ago is that first, I think one of our greatest strengths is that we do have a centralized intake process that's available for all employees to initiate their own request, to define what they see as their own need, what they see as their own accommodation. Those intake requests are managed by our centralized and enterprise-wide disability accommodation experts. So we have SMEs who support different business sectors. They are in charge of the interactive process with the employee, really kind of help initiate that process, and do have responsibility to manage the process end to end from that intake to the delivery, be a single point of contact. I think that's one of the true strengths of our program currently. We do, the other challenge, or I'm sorry, opportunity I would say is that while we stood up 5 years ago and while I think we have built out a fairly robust process, we are constantly looking at opportunities for process improvement. I think that this is such an area that continues to change, continues to evolve with best practices, with case law, with different in-country practices. And for us, as we're thinking about where we go from here, part of it is identifying where we can continue to improve, where we have opportunities to make a better employee experience, most importantly, and trying to continue to make sure that's centered at our work. One of the key challenges that we have from our perspective is systems. We do, as I mentioned, have a centralized intake process. We have a centralized tracking process, but our system as it stands right now, it is not as robust as it needs to be to drive towards some of the metrics, Susan, that you were just talking about doing a good job of monitoring delivery times, real kind of time actioning that we can push out to stakeholders, getting those prompts, getting reporting out. We're actually in the process of going through an RFP to evaluate our current system, evaluate systems for the future. And I think that that is one of the opportunities that we see is creating a long-term impact for us to continue to build toward more process efficiencies and a better employee experience as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So because of the time constraints, I'm going to move on and ask Jody from Shell to do just what you've done, but I hope that we can come back to questions at the end, Naomi, and start to explore really what you're needing when you go out with that RFP. Jody, can you tell us what, from your perspective, the couple of things that are really working for you and where you are spotting the challenge?
Hi, yeah, absolutely. Good morning from London, wherever you are. So for Shell, I guess it's going to sound a bit of a similar story for the positives, but for Shell, definitely one of the key things that's working really well is having a centralised accessibility centre. So again, having that one conduit as a central contact point who can obviously work with different functions and so on to make the adjustments happen. So that's working really well. That also means we've got one central portal where you can go and request either an adjustment or support from our occupational health to have an assessment and things like that. So again, it's all kept central, so that works great. I guess really the biggest challenges, I would say, are lead times. So for certain specialist equipment, so for instance, specialised chairs, there are so many types on the market that for most people, of course, we have really good ergonomic chairs that work perfectly well. But when we need those specialist chairs, they can differ so greatly, and you're talking 6 to 8 weeks just for manufacture. So that is definitely a challenge, and it's not so simple just to store some. One, it's about space, but because of the multiple types. And from a hardware perspective, in some countries, local procurement just doesn't exist, and finding global suppliers is really, really difficult. You know, we have suppliers who, for instance, do global, but not South America. So that doesn't really help. So we're looking at
interesting definition of global, isn't it?
So we're looking at, you know, how we actually work with partners to make sure we have got defined supply chains, so that we're also not only we're making the user experience far better and we're making the lead time shorter, but also that we're actually setting up our operational guys on site to succeed, because, you know, they have good intention, I have no doubt, but if they don't have someone who can deliver it for them, then that's tough, right?
Absolutely. Can I just clarify, when you say you've got a centralized process, does that mean when you want to buy a specialized chair, is this your team in the Philippines, Jodie?
Yes, so our accessibility centre is in Manila.
So they order the chair for your colleagues.
So they don't directly order. What they do is they manage the request and they go through the real estate team. So they have focal points on all sites, and there's central focal points depending on what it is.
And is that real estate team at national level then, or at global?
So there are site focal points. So there are local, so national teams, but then there are also global points for either for escalation, or it just depends. If it's something, for instance, that's not in the catalogue and it's kind of, I guess, off script, then it may be that they need to reach out more centrally.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm wishing for this workshop every minute now. Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you for that concise summary, and turn to Andy Garrett from GSK. And Andy, you've been trying to roll out your centralized process from Japan to Toronto, haven't you? Andy, you there? Andy,
Hi.
are you on mute?
Yeah, that was me on mute, sorry. Hi everyone, wherever you are in the world. I hope you're keeping safe and well. Yeah, Susan's right. We've been on the journey at GSK trying to set up the workplace adjustment service in multiple markets. We've been successful, we think, in the UK and the US, working with Microlink as our supply chain. So, you know, as many of the components Susan described, so we've got an end-to-end process, a centralized service line. You know, we've got some really good metrics in terms of our average case duration overall. I certainly echo the point Jodie made about some very specialist and bespoke like chair solutions. You know, they take quite a while to build and get delivered, so that does stretch out some of those delivery times. And I think for us, one of the successes in the process is in our scope of service. Given that different jurisdictions have different legal parameters around disability, so we swept that away, and our service line's open to all of our employees with injury, health condition, disability, pregnancy. And it doesn't matter to us which of those reasons you might need an adjustment at work, because for us it's very much about productivity. You know, it's a values-driven initiative to deliver some of those metrics that Susan pointed to around productivity. And the who qualifies bit is easier without the complexity around who's disabled and who's not. So we think that's a strength for us in the scope and the end-to-end service process, centralized. We've got a dedicated team dealing with different hello? Sorry, I was getting a little bit of feedback there. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. Is the main challenge for us in terms of going into new markets, as Susan's well aware from many of our discussions, is in the supply chain of let's call them non-standard solutions. You know, some IT peripheral things are fairly straightforward, but if you're going to large and volume suppliers, some of our global supply chain partners, you know, because our volumes are relatively low, they don't seem interested in working with us on, you know, low volume, low margin, high complexity solutions. They want to sell us, you know, large numbers of standard kit. So for us, the biggest challenge is having the specialist suppliers helping Microlink to scale up into different countries and having sufficient volume throughput to justify the investment for their their case support team, as we've been using them so far in 2 countries, to justify the investment of them running that service in a different market. So, yeah, some great strengths in the process management, but biggest challenges for us are in the supply chain end, and getting suppliers to recognise the importance of supplying non-standard solutions for our employees as just important to us as the volume items. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in that supply chain piece. Potentially with us, there's a lot of people on the call from multinational corporations. We're all buying pretty much the same stuff. Is there scope for us to think about, collaborating on our supply chains in some way, to strengthen the volumes, to justify the investment and get supply chains working for us and helping us deliver both the solutions that we need, and of course, if you've got the right supply chains in, that will help with your lead times, your end-to-end service line. You can manage all the great parts of the process from request through to what someone needs, but if you can't get the supply chain to deliver the product, then you could be waiting a long time.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking that actually, as we're looking at what the workstream priorities might be for the ILO network, having another session, another hour focused just on creative thinking around the suppliers is probably high on the list of priorities. For me, there is another dimension to the suppliers, which perhaps GSK doesn't experience, is procurement not ensuring that suppliers that have a key impact on your ability to deliver adjustments, like facilities management, like IT help desks and so on, have the necessary disability expertise and at least some expectation of speed of response and that sort of thing. Certainly the Canadian government has done a deal where they're saying that if you have been identified as a disabled person with an adjustment that requires the built environment to adapt, you get red flagged as a priority. Because of course what they tend to do is you came in March, but they had 6 months worth of work already planned and they wait for 6 months before they even look at your request. So the red flagging process being built into contracts can be really helpful. So I'm just agreeing with you, Andy. I think we need to look at that very, very carefully. And there is potential, as you say, for multinationals coming together to make a difference on that one.
Well, and I think an element of that conversation, Susan, is about, excuse me, leveraging our purchasing power, as a large organization, like you said, when we're renegotiating our volume contracts, can we put pressure on our volume suppliers to provide the non-standard solutions as well? We've not been successful in that yet.
Okay, well, we'll get there. Karen, did you want in?
Yes, thank you. I agree exactly with what you've both been saying. I think there's a third element which does sort of link to what you were saying as well, is around the IT accessibility of tools that are used in the industry. So for example, organizations dealing with travel bookings and things like that, Sabre is probably the most inaccessible tool with regards to people using JAWS. And again, if I think purchasing power of people who have those kind of requirements would be a really good thing to work on the whole IT accessibility as well, because again, when you're taking things off the shelf and that hasn't been thought about, it's very difficult to retrofit and fix anything that you bring into the organization. Absolutely. And that goes back to procurement and not necessarily having the knowledge why you need to ask for that right from the beginning.
And of course, procurement would argue that their internal customers decide what they buy. It's not procurement. We can't talk about procurement this morning, I'm afraid, at any length, but we will come back to that, I promise. Okay, I'm going to continue now just to do a bit of a summary and then open it up to a conversation. So what are we up against when we're trying to make this move from ad hoc? Just to summarize the implications of what we've been saying. There is no named senior leader responsible for the quality of the service in many companies. So how do you move on if nobody actually is held accountable for the quality of what's going on? The legal compliance messaging, we'll only do this if we have to. Will the focus on medical advice and diagnosis, not on how managers enable productivity. So I can remember an health physician at one of the world's biggest IT companies saying she'd had 6 people dyslexic sent to her as an occupational health doctor, and as though somehow she had a vaccine or something that would work. The good thing about her was she had gone out and done her homework on the kind of specialist software that might be useful, but it was hardly an appropriate response from the company. I mean, people not trusted to self-refer and all the negative impact that has linked to managers' pay, which always slows delivery. Am I right in thinking, Jody and Andy and Naomi, managers don't pay? I forgot to check with you.
Yeah, that is absolutely the case for Shell. It's a trust-based model as well.
Yeah, and Andy certainly.
Yeah, yeah, as is centrally approved. The managers aren't involved in the approvals process at all.
Naomi?
Likewise for Northrop, we have a centralized budget.
Yeah, I think it's fundamental. Thank you. Managers are expected to invest time and credibility trying to make this unmanaged system work. And that has all kinds of adverse impact on relationships with the team, etc. And we've just been discussing procurement don't require key suppliers to know what they're doing, or at least meet some performance standards. Next. So then I've tried to cluster what the critical success factors would look like. If you were designing a system from the beginning, what would you do? First, somebody has to decide that this is an important business support service that needs to be managed and that somebody needs to be held accountable for it. And that it's going to be best practice, not legal compliance, or at least good practice, not legal compliance. So that means somebody has to own this. This for me is where the missing chief productivity officer comes in at C-suite. Is this a COO's job to own this? That's who drove the re-engineering process inside Lloyd's Banking Group. But somebody up there needs to say, I'm not happy with the way this is working, it's taking too long, and we've got all these costs, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to set performance standards globally that people are going to have to figure out how to deliver, agree a budget, determine what to deliver centrally, who's going to be responsible at national level, just as you would with any other important business line. We're setting a speed of delivery standard. And I want to see some management information that tells me how many people are asking and what they're asking for and how long it takes them and why we keep saying no when people ask for work from home. The management of it, a dedicated service manager. Now we've got, I think, Jody, Naomi, and Andy are dedicated service managers, responsible for the design and management of the end-to-end service and for, hacking away with procurement to try to find the right suppliers and all of that. Not many companies have got these creatures, which is why it's marvelous we've got 3. And E from IBM, you're a dedicated service manager too, I think.
That's right, yeah, that's correct.
So somebody needs to manage the thing. Again, line managers don't pay. This manager is collecting the data, which tells you how it's working. Adjustments become a managerial, not a medical responsibility. That's a huge shift and a really important one. Single door to the service. And the redesign or the design is informed by what happens when you ask for adjustment surveys, not how many people have we encouraged to tell us that they have a disability, that kind of data, but what happens when you ask for an adjustment? Well, I have to go here and then I have to go there and then I'm assessed and then. And that really helps you to figure out how to streamline. 2 more chunks, the enabling products and processes here. Line managers being encouraged to say yes, but denials needing senior sign off because the senior players need to get a picture of why are we, we're continuing to not allow people to do this or that or that. I mean, a classic would be, we've got colleagues who have adjustments in country X, but when they move to country Y, we discover the legislation doesn't require adjustments, so we take away their adjustment package. So we need to, if those denials aren't actually monitored, they get lost in the system. Disability and accessibility expertise outsourced. Very few companies have everything in-house that they need in terms of the know-how around accessibility. Possibly they bring in a service coordinator kind of role, the sort of thing that Microlink does with some of our colleagues, or for pieces of the process. Employees trusted to self-refer from a central catalog. And the catalog, I've got stories here, a huge organization, a blind person is recruited in Nigeria. His boss says to procurement in Germany, we want JAWS, and the procurement chap said, you can't tell me what to buy. It's marvelous. But the point I make is without a central pre-approved catalog, all kinds of surprises emerge in the system as it's just taking too long. Passports or agreements that capture what's been agreed so managers don't have to renegotiate, a catalog of soft adjustments, and the service level agreements internally with property and dock health and so on. An important message in all of this being that this cannot just be somehow all done by HR in isolation. The reason for that service manager is that this lifts above and goes through all these different departments. Culture, the big message for me on culture is that the service is described as something that enhances productivity and well-being, treating people fairly. It's not a service triggered by a legal obligation to make accommodations. So next, I wanted to then take a look at the suppliers. We've talked about this a bit, so I think I might just summarize here by saying it's not going to be simple. We don't, as Andy's been saying, have a global process that works, and that this needs to be a priority now as we're moving forward in terms of how do we make it easier for multinationals to get this right. Next. Now, as I've been looking at this from a global perspective, because of course that's the essence of the work that the Global Business and Disability Network facilitates. So for me, there's 5 crucial questions that would form the basis of a kind of a strategy that enables you to answer the question, what do national leaders need from global if they're going to get this right? So the first question is, what must global require? And if it doesn't require consistent delivery, a speed of response standard, that senior executive ownership, etc., that won't work. What do we want from global in terms of messages and encouragement that enables national leaders to present the rationale for doing this? What do we facilitate at global? So how does head office provide national leaders with the performance standards, the tools, the practical guidance that expedite improvement? What must global resource? Do they need to fund at national level the investment of time required to redesign the service, or is it being designed in the Philippines on their behalf, et cetera, et cetera? And of course, resourcing the B2B learning that, well, how many hours of time have now you all been dedicated to sharing information through the network and through webinars like this? And what behaviors and leadership must global reward? So I would just say to anyone who's trying to get a global approach to this, that those are some of the key questions on top of the building blocks that we've addressed 2 minutes ago. Next. So that kind of takes us to what this business-to-business learning might actually look like in the context of the Global Business and Disability Network, and how it can enable both its members and the wider multinational business community to really make progress on this. So we were saying that the learning exchange, we're testing, is there a demand, a need? Are you interested? Peer-to-peer support for members of this emerging community, both of the senior owners and the people making it happen, the managers, enabling members to define best practice in the design and management of the end-to-end process across multiple geographies, co-producing some new tools and guidance. You know, is there a possibility, or what's the word I want, to co-produce in the sense of jointly resource? Because of course, the ILO doesn't have £1 million it can suddenly just dedicate to producing new tools, but surely it would be cost effective for companies to come together to take a look at what survey tools we might co-produce that would make it easier to ask the right questions at national when you're setting out to do your baseline or establish where you're starting from. Building relationships and capacity with key suppliers. So that's very much building on the conversation we've been having today about the supply problem. And to enable members as thought leaders and innovators to enable the wider multinational business community to get this right. In the context, you know, certainly of the recovery program and the driving economic growth that we'll be up against in a few months' time. So So that's what, Stefan and I have been looking at in terms of, would there be an interest from organizations like yourselves in coming to set up some kind of a learning exchange like this? What would its priorities be, and so on. And I'm really pleased with myself because I was told to give 20 minutes for discussion and I did it. Stefan, I did it. So that's where we're stopping for the moment in terms of this presentation, but the point was now to open up for conversation. Questions that emerged as you were listening to me and to our colleagues, suggestions in terms of what a learning exchange might do, how it might work. Where do we want to start? Who wants to go first? Famous question. Eve.
Hi, Susan, this is Deepa here, and I'm from India, and I work at Dell Technologies.
Oh, right, good.
So I kind of lead the diversity and inclusion for India here. And one of the key things that I do is inclusions for persons with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So Dell has gone far ahead in terms of inclusion of persons with disabilities, across the pillar, be it from hiring to enabling the workplace, to also look into supplier diversity, spaces, and of course our CSR programs, right? And if you see, we've been doing it for about 7 years now. We have close to 200 plus employees within the company, ranges across the org, from software engineer to someone from a service desk to someone who is a product engineer. So we've had various experience because we do hire persons across all kind of disability, right? So the India has about 21 disability according to our Disability Act. So we kind of hire people across. We've also done something like a profound disability internship, where we've been able to, create internship program for people with severe disabilities or even multiple disabilities, right? But then we have done this sheer from, leadership presence. We've done it because of our employee resource groups. And then we've been able to channelize this across all the functions. But when I'm listening to you, I still feel we are not centralized. I still feel some of it is very ad hoc. Because when it comes to technology, I think we have done quite a very good job in terms of ensuring from the hiring or even before hiring, right, from the recruitment process, we've been able to include all kind of support and tools that's required for people who come on board. But if I look at other ad hoc requests, it could be someone who required like an accessible cab service, right, to come to office, or someone who requires a bit of more accessibility technology, right? It's not just alone being at work, but at their work, at their home environment, right? So, and those kind of things become very ad hoc, and we still kind of take it basis on the requests that we get. Some of it is also on assistive aids, because people do not have enough resources to buy, say, an automatic wheelchair, right?
Indeed.
So
And
things
so do you think then that the learning exchange that Stefan's looking at would be useful for you?
Absolutely, because the ad hoc request could definitely be channelized, and there's definitely, very good capacity learning here, because not everyone understands the disability language sometimes.
Indeed.
So I think, yeah, definitely, I'm pretty much looking forward to see how we can actually engage, not just only on the technology side, but also across the board, right? Be it on the supply diversity, be it on other functions. So yeah, totally.
Thank you. That's very encouraging. And so, conscious of the time, who else? Rick, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, I wanted to ask Susan, your speakers earlier, about have they come across any impact of what I would call cultural dissonance, the different society perspectives around disability and how that affects how they go about the adjustment piece in various territories.
I know, Andy, you were in Japan recently. Did you find the culture there was and somehow having an impact on whether or not
Well,
they would
to some degree,
your model?
to some degree, yes. In some markets, we experience, evidence of, very medical model to the way they currently manage disability, either through recruitment, onboarding, and so like employment quotas and things like that. But when I present the model of our workplace adjustment service, our ambition to bring it to their market, and of course explain that we've set a much broader scope for workplace adjustments, as I described earlier, and how that is supported through our Global Disability Council. So it's part of our, living our values. It's a cultural and productivity piece for us as an enterprise-wide thing. I found them very open to moving on from the medical model. We do see evidence of that, because I think that's born out of what people have been used to. Like, what do we have to do to comply if there's disability compliance legislation in market? And of course, if they've got a medical model. But when we set out the scope and say, well, this is what we want to bring as a service line, this is what's worked for us in the UK and the US, these are the benefits, these are the metrics, this is the scope, it's in line with our values and so on. They've been very open to and really keen to adopt the new model, if you like, to demedicalize that, if that answers the question.
Excellent, thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to comment on that question?
No, I'll just add to something later on, but anybody else can go first.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Srila.
Thank you. Good day to everybody. I hope everybody's keeping safe. So I am from Tata Consultancy Services, and I head the disability and neurodiversity function. We have about over 450,000 employees across the globe, and we work in 40 plus countries. So I think I would like to add to Rick is that a lot of the time I'm kind of juggling the different government policies and approaches and contexts and social realities in the different countries. But what's been easy, I think, is to have like one disability policy coming in from the centrally for the whole organization, which gives a certain commitment, which comes over and above, and then we adjust to whatever is available. But if the commitment is there, then it's easier to get leadership buy-in, it's easier to get budgets. Interestingly, I have found that a huge entry point has been through having through the health and safety teams, which create emergency evacuation, because that's when they realize what is really missing. So a lot of the physical access related stuff, we found that we could make an entry point through that. I'm sorry, that does come into the medical listing, but then it kind of changed more into social. But the other thing, ironically, we are the IT team for the Tata Group, and we have been struggling with the digital access piece for a long time. And overnight, because of COVID-19, I think we took like a 1 decade leap into digital access. Because the conversations people were not willing to have before just happened in 2 weeks. And we had servers and accessibilities and people were following up. So now that we follow up with our employees with disability, and so I have weekly conversations with our network, and also have like an open helpline to have people access me if there's a problem. So now is during emergency time, but I think this is kind of setting the trend of what we are going to follow in adjustment and accessibility. It has led to people listening to problems. It is people having much less response time, because at the end of the day, we have to deliver. It's business business deliverables which are at stake, and these adjustments therefore get linked very closely to business, and a person with disability is no longer seen as a burden but as a part of the whole. So while we had case by case adjustments before, with low response turnarounds and huge fights for budget, it's just become easier. And I think that if we carry on with this framework of approach of I think we actually, I really see this as the future of work. And mental health is the other thing which has come in, because that is a unifier, because everybody's under lockdown. Everybody, irrespective of any kind of known disabilities, is going through some kind of anxiety or tensions and depression. And we have a mental health helpline, and it's everybody, irrespective of who you are, irrespective of how senior or junior you are, mental health is on the table now. So I think these are the two big differences I see. If this webinar had happened a month back, I would probably be having a different conversation. But because it's happening today, and I think that I really use the word physical distancing and social connectivity, because this has really brought the globe together. This, I think, has kind of dissolved nation state boundaries in a way that others have not been able to. So this is really the right time for these exchanges to happen. I'm talking too much, bye-bye.
That's all right. That's very helpful. Because, of course, I've been thinking that we use the language all too often of accommodation for disabled people. But if you let everybody work from home, it's just agile and clever, right? So the language will change. And it's part of what Andy's talking about in terms of people see that actually everybody benefits, because the whole business becomes more accessible and easier for everybody to thrive. I think you're right.
Susan, it's Andy. One comment coming back to your question, I think, about the learning exchange.
Right.
You know, and looking at the slides that we've gone through, you know, I'm seeing obviously the components of, you know, a best practice model. It's a next iteration of, you know, where we, you know, I remember when I started out on this journey looking at the Lloyd's case study,
right.
What were the components of that? And of course, this, I think, is the next generation of, you know, what are the key components of a good workplace adjustments service that can operate equitably across different jurisdictions. I think probably there's scope for maybe a maturity model.
Indeed, yeah.
Of you know, what can be applied in different markets, because I, you know, recognize that some countries are still focusing on, you know, employment quotas, and adjustments are limited to people with disability, and I you know, that's a bugbear of mine. Who is disabled and who's not? For me, it's about who can access the workplace, and compliance and legal definitions of disability, I think, get in the way, which is why we moved that that component away from our model. So it's about accessibility for all rather than who's disabled enough to warrant the help, if we're going to drive the productivity initiative. So I'm sensing the learning exchange as that next generation of the Lloyd's case study into a best practice model, and maybe even a maturity model for the different components of a workplace adjustment service.
Excellent. Thank you.
Susan, can I just do a very quick comment? The three components you've quite rightly highlighted, it's the cultural, it's the kind of management, and also the last one is the technical. The technical aspect really comes down to identifying the solution, supplying the solution, and help to implement it. So you quite eloquently put it in your slide. On the identifying the solution, I think is really the most important part. It's like having a DIY of selecting products that you think it's good for you. Sometimes can actually backfire on you. If you don't get it right, you might stop any other solution because you think it won't work. What we've done over the past 2 years, we've designed an AI-based solution that in a way, it should help individual to identify a very quick solution without having to wait for weeks and months to get an expert telling them. We are quite optimistic it'll be good. It's about kind of 80% accurate now. We're trying to make it to about 90%. But the reason I mentioned that is that WHO has just gone for RFP to design a AI solution for assistive technologies, but it's very, very much like medical model. I'm actually asking maybe ILO to tag along that and request something similar for the workplace, because I don't think they've really focused on the employment side. It's more independent living. I'm quite happy to, I've actually put a bid for it, but I'm quite happy to make this tool available through ILO for anyone who wants to use it in the future. I'll certainly explain that to Stefan if he is interested.
Well, let's follow up on that afterwards, Nasser. That sounds really interesting. And we certainly didn't mean to downplay the importance of the technical know-how at the center of all this. It's just that I was focusing on the design process, if you like, the system design, rather than the detail of what needs to happen. But everything's in the detail in these things, as you say. So we'll certainly come back to that. We've got 4 minutes, probably 3, if I'm allowed 60 seconds to say a few thank yous at the end. Anybody else wanting to come in now?
Yes,
Susan, I have a question.
I would like to, I will not take more than 1 minute.
Okay,
I'm sorry, Rosa. I am sorry to interrupt you. Quick, 2 things maybe. One is keeping in mind that the level of maturity of their disability inclusion journey of many members of GBDN is different. Yep. We should be careful about making sure that first we address the business case for people, for organizations that are starting their disability inclusion journey, insisting on the role of an executive sponsor to really coordinate the complexity and address the complexity of when you start, putting in place an accommodation process. We've been doing that for 10 years in IBM, so I can tell you that when people rotate and when new executives come on board, etc., this isn't always easy. And the second point I would like to insist on is the continuity. If, like Northrop Grumman, GSK, Shell, IBM, and others, we have been working on that for years. But we must make sure that we not only we address the challenges that the guests have already explained in terms of relationship with vendors, the global versus local supply chain, etc., which are absolutely key. But we also need to ensure the continuity of the services internally. When, as I said, people rotate, we must make sure that the business case remains on the top of the agenda of the corporation. And this is also a political discussion that we must have within our respective organizations. I will stop and give the floor to Rosa. Sorry.
Okay. So one more person?
Hi. Hi, everyone. Thank you for organizing this meeting, first of all. I will be quick as well. So I'm a person with disability, and I have some experience in the UN and private companies as well. And I have just a question and some comments on the reasonable accommodation. So it is really difficult to know when to ask about reasonable accommodation, because especially in the UN, and everywhere, getting a job, going to an interview is really like a competitive process. So if we ask a reasonable accommodation, it can be also a burden for somebody, and we might be not discriminated, but we might not be chosen because of maybe of this reasonable accommodation. So, and sometimes they ask what you would like as reasonable accommodation before you get the job. And it would be probably, in my opinion, is better if they say you are the person chosen and what reasonable accommodation you need. And then it's a discussion between the person and the manager or already who is deciding. So my question is, my question is regarding this reasonable accommodation. So there's just one comment is, I think for me, my opinion is, it's easier to ask something like a furniture, what we need or any interpretation, but it's really difficult to get reasonable accommodation on flexible time, teleworking, part-time. For me, it was really a difficulty in the UN as well. So just if you can answer regarding that, please.
Well, I think what you're highlighting is the need for a particular focus on how you make adjustment in the recruitment process. That's because it's quite a distinct challenge, different from when you're already in the organization. And the other
no, before you are in, actually, before you are selected.
In the recruitment process, absolutely right.
I can answer that, Susan, very briefly. So yes, you can have adjustments in the recruitment and selection process, and that's about your access to the process. But we now, once we've made a hiring decision, we reach out to employees prior to joining, saying, to support your productivity in the role, do you need any adjustments to enable you to do the job? Which is different to an adjustment in the accommodation in the selection process.
And okay, yeah, but sorry, just a question. What I wanted to ask, if, like, let's say I would need part-time working, maybe 80%, or I need more teleworking, and if I say it before the recruitment process, how will I know if I'm not getting the job because I need these? Yeah. So that's my question, basically.
And it's an important question. And if we had another half an hour, I'd love to go into it in more detail. Can I just check with my colleagues? Is the technology about to turn itself off automatically, or can we continue for 5 more minutes? Kimberly, do we know?
We can continue.
We can continue? Okay. Because I did want to say that the soft adjustments that I described at the beginning, having an actual policy that spells out for managers and staff that gives managers permission to offer soft adjustments, to tolerate drops in productivity when a fluctuating condition has an impact, for example. That's really important, and I think is quite unusual. So you're raising some important issues which this emerging learning exchange would want to address. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple more minutes then. Is there anybody else who wanted to come in before I...
Yes.
Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, hi. Can
Hello.
I speak?
Kermata or Mohammed, who is...
Yeah, Salome.
Yeah, this is Mohammed. Can I just speak for 2 seconds? Actually, I am from PwC, and I just wanted to know, actually, I'm also a person with disability, but I work for digital transformation. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight, especially in this COVID-19 era when people are actually working from home, and so one of the things that we did do it at the global level, that whatever the software we choose for working from home or for support our virtual private network is indeed accessible. And I'm very happy to say that, we have gone with G Suite, and fortunately it has been working wonders. I just wanted to highlight that it's very important, especially for a business continuity plan. We also need to be aware that we have to check for accessibility in terms of IT infrastructures when we actually proceed to roll out or even to test the business continuity plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. There was someone else who wanted to come in there?
Diane from BDF.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you, Susan, for convening this webinar. It's been really interesting, and it certainly chimes with what we hear from our members and partners in terms of this being a really critical issue. So no surprises there. Just on a positive note, I really hope that the unprecedented situation that we're all facing with the coronavirus, going back to your point about everyone having to work dynamically or flexibly or in an agile way, will have a legacy of changing how people view requests for adjustments or accommodations for disabled colleagues. I know that's an optimistic spin on it, and NASA and I had a good conversation yesterday about the possibility of it going the other way and people ending up being put on sick leave because they can't get the adjustments in their place, their home working environment. But I'm going to be hopeful. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hello. Kimata.
Yes, Salome Kimata, CPM, International Kenya, Country Office. One of the speakers talked of one way of enhancing accessibility in the workplace is they have set up a centralized accessibility center. And they have specialized equipment within the center. So I would like to know, apart from the specialized wheelchair, what other specialized equipments do they have? And number 2, what are the specialized services they offer in this center? Thank you.
Kimata, we don't have, is it Kimata Salome? Forgive me, is that the correct name?
Yes.
We don't have the time to do that, but I'm thinking that
Yes.
Microlink, and I have to thank Microlink for, in effect, sponsoring this for us today. Microlink have a list of the most frequently requested assistive devices that we can happily send out to everyone. After this, what you just raised is an example of the benefit of having a learning exchange where we can schedule a conversation with companies that are interested in to come together and take a look at what does go into the central catalog, and what as I turn to the end of this session, turn to Stefan to say, would you like to come in now, Stefan, in terms of next steps and how we can proceed with this? Because I could see 2 or 3 webinars just focused on themes that have come out of our conversation today over the next 4 or 5 months. What's your thinking at this point?
Yes, Susan, thank you. Well, thank you first, Susan, for organizing this. We're happy to co-host it. It was nice to see that 60 participants were taking part. I've listened carefully. I had several notes. I've been changing those notes over during the webinar. I think there's definitely an appetite for the issue. I think that where I see the main challenge is, and it's a bit in line with what Eve was saying, is that companies are in very different levels of knowledge on this issue. There are companies and organizations, and when I look at it from an UN perspective, we are at this very first level, which is basically many entities are still not even aware about the relevance of workplace adjustments. Then other companies are aware, and organizations are aware, but might have been sort of approaching it more on an ad hoc basis, perhaps at a national level. And then there are a few companies, like the 3 examples we heard, that are already addressing it from a global perspective. Now, the global perspective, of course, is our angle as Global Business Disability Network, but I think that if we go only for the global level, we are going to reach out a very small community, because we're going to miss out all the others, those that have not yet understood the relevance, that are still looking at it as something that is only there for persons with disabilities, while I think it's much more powerful to approach it as an issue which is relevant for people with disabilities, but for many others, and should not require disability certificate. We need, when you look at it from a global perspective, you need to ensure a level playing field for all your staff, independently of where they are, which is where the central fund comes in. But I mean, if we only look at the global dimension, we will be relevant only for very few. So I think we need to find a way of addressing the global dimension, but without forgetting making the pitch and addressing also, let's say, more basic levels of knowledge, because many organizations, also in the corporate sector, are still also at a very low level. So I think it's a bit there where I think I see the challenge, but I definitely see there is an appetite for more webinars. I fully agree. So I think we need to discuss that offline soon, and also then see what basic tools are not already there, because I mean there are tools there. I think probably the tools that are not there are the global tools, but even in preparing a global tool, we need to address the challenge that I just mentioned. I think I'll leave it there, but definitely we will come back to all of you and beyond with very soon with additional ideas. So back to you.
Yeah. Well, I'm agreeing as I listen, because the key question for me is, what do national leaders need from head office? Right? It's up and down all the time. What does head office need to require to get consistency? But what do the national leaders need from head office if they're going to make progress on this? And so, that's where your network, Stefan, is so important. So my ability are very interested in this. The network in the German-speaking region, they're looking at a tool, a calculator that would enable them to persuade any company of the cost associated with inaction, the non-visible costs, if you like. The Australian network, that's why Suzanne was joining us. She's got a new task force coming together to look at procurement, which I think could be very helpful in terms of the supplier issues, testing new ideas. Of course, the Business Disability Forum in the UK has been doing a lot of work on the adjustments, practical toolkits in terms of what managers need to know and do in order to make adjustments and beyond. So I do think that linking the global and the national leadership makes perfect sense, and that we've got such a wonderful network of networks through your community, Stefan, that I'm sure we can make that work. Okay. And so I think I'm supposed to now be saying time's up, aren't I? I get very nervous about running over time.
We could continue for a long time on this topic. It's about making the work accessible more than disability, and making the work environments accessible. But yeah, we could go on.
And I think, Stefan, in terms of the almost the campaigning task to get large corporates to pay attention in the first instance, the group that you were described as, they're at such a different level. They don't even have the basic awareness of the benefits that might result from this. It's getting perhaps some videos, so we get Andy and Jody and talking to camera, get the messages out about what's working now. So much to play with in terms of the learning exchange, but we'll come back to everybody with some ideas. And I would encourage everyone who was part of this today to please let us know what involvement you'd like to have as we take this forward. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Susan. Just to mention that we have recorded this webinar, and we will also make that available for all of you in case that you want to share it with other colleagues who were not able to join in because of time difference or whatever other reasons. So, but yes, we'll come back soon with additional suggestions and ideas, and probably more webinars.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Stefan, for organizing this for us.
Thank you for facilitating.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Well,
good session.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.